So this is Jerry Pagane. This is Jerry's art show. This is his second art show that deals with deaf. Now Jerry talked earlier about growing up deaf and the problems of that. And ever since he was a child, his one main connection to life has always been his art. So art always sort of remained with him. And so what happened is now within about the last 10 years, he's coming to grips with himself as a deaf artist. So before, he spent a lot of time on the neighborhood, and when he was doing the neighborhood, the prints, it was also about the fires and the drugs and the upside, like the restaurants and like that. And he also has a big history. If you want another view of gentrification, if you go through his sign history, it's really amazing, because if you look at his sign history, you'll find all these restaurants and galleries and all these things that used to be here, and you'll look at the sign and you'll remember it, so it takes you back through memory lane. And then so Jerry went through those periods of making prints about the neighborhood and all that. And then what happened is, about 10 years ago, he started coming to grips with himself, the artist, and deaf. Yeah. And being deaf. So that's a big part of what this is about, expressing the relationship between the hearing world and the deaf world.
Okay, now this is about a baby. A deaf baby have a human right to learn sign language. And the reason we today was teaching in college or high school teach the baby sign language because it helped to advance their education. In old days, they did not believe to teach deaf person sign language because they felt it's inferior. Alexander Bell is one of them who believes to hold the deaf person's hands back, their back, and not to speak at all. And that was wrong. And he thought that would improve deaf culture and education. It did. It reversed, went backwards. It was important to teach deaf persons sign language so they could be more educated and advanced. That's why you see college and a school now teaching sign language. And it was a technology that was holding the deaf culture back. Technology such as telephone, they only make telephone for hearing people, nothing to do with the deaf culture. Now today on television movie, they have subtitle on TV screen movies, so this way deaf person can understand what television movie is about. So that made it improve the education for the deaf culture. It was technology was holding deaf culture back.
But Jerry actually was a first for a lot of things. He was the first person to graduate, deaf person to graduate from Carnegie Mellon University, first deaf person to teach at Atlanta College of Art. When he was a kid growing up in Pittsburgh, they weren't used to deaf people at all. First school he went to was for deaf and dumb, so that's a big baggage to go through. Then he went through all these foster homes, and they couldn't really deal with him because he was deaf. And then he went through 2 orphanages, and one was for disturbed children, and the other one was for crippled children. Everything had a negative sort of aspect attached to it, so it's a big struggle. And then he had no ears, and then so they did 15 operations between 6 and 15 to try to reconstruct ears, and they couldn't. They tried to drill and find an ear canal, but they only found bone. So as a young child growing up, it's a very hard thing to overcome, operations, not being able to hear. And then when he went to school at 5, it's for the deaf and dumb. So, that's a heavy word to tell a kid, well, you're at the dumb school. So he's had a lot of baggage that he's had to sort of carry through. But then he came to New York in 1983 and lived between C and D on 7th Street. And if you remember the Lower East Side at that time, it was a serious drug neighborhood. And Jerry was there, and Avenue D, and that was like one of the most serious streets in the whole neighborhood. And the 9th Precinct at that time had one of the most murders in the city. It was like number 1, number 2. And so to be deaf and then a white guy, because it was mostly a Hispanic area, to sort of have all of that. And that was when I was talking to a person that was here today, Mario, about an aspect of the inner city that people don't realize. And once the people realized that Jerry was deaf and part of the neighborhood, nobody ever touched him. He never had a problem. And within these inner cities, whether it be East LA or Compton or whatever, they always have this sort of negative sort of view of it's the most dangerous place in the world. Well, Jerry proves that, it's just a neighborhood as well. And so maybe 10% is like really, bad, and 1% is really bad. But there's also grandmothers and children and crippled children and the whole thing. So Jerry's an example of, the positive side of growing up in an inner city. And he also worked as an independent. So he survived by his own means because he became a sign painter. So he was his own individual businessman as well. So if you want to have another view of gentrification, if you go through Jerry's sign book, you will see all the different businesses that were here. And some of them are restaurants that are really pretty famous, and galleries and all of that. And then you'll see all these galleries, maybe Gracie Mansion or whatever. And then you realize the gallery's no longer here. So his book of signs is another way of understanding gentrification. And then, like I say, about 10 years ago, he really sort of got into the thing about, I'm an artist. Because there's a certain point, if you spend your whole life doing art, you become an artist. So when you get that totality of oneness, it becomes who you are, and that's your art. And so a part of Jerry and his art is the fact that he's deaf. So I see Jerry really as sort of a symbol within the deaf community of how somebody can go through an ultimate struggle, and with every odd against you, you still sort of come through and triumph. And art, and I look at this show as Jerry's triumph. And it's also very sort of important for deaf kids and deaf people to realize that yes, you can become an artist, you can be whoever you want to be, you just sort of have to be able to do it. And Jerry's proof of that. And I think he should be a symbol really to deaf people and to people with disabilities to realize, that he came to New York, he stood on his own, he was in one of the most serious drug neighborhoods in the world, and he was deaf, and he survived all of that, and was self-sufficient with his own job, his own business, doing signs. And then now this art, which is really informative, and it really is a great symbol to deaf people and other people with disabilities that you too can thrive and survive and carry on. And that's what this art represents to me. So Jerry is sort of one of my favorite artists, but he's also one of my heroes. And he is the toughest guy I know. I've been on the Lower East Side for a long time. I know a lot of tough guys. I mean, really tough guys. And Jerry has been through more than anybody I know. He's just a little guy, and he survived it all. Jerry Pagane, the man of the minute, the man of the hour, the man of the year.